Hello, my name is Michael Lambert, and today I want to talk about property prices for a change. I wanted to explain why, in my view, for two very good reasons, property prices are currently unsustainable and are likely to collapse before very long. Now, I'm no expert on property prices. I'm no expert on anything for that matter, but I think what I have to say is just, frankly, common sense. It's nothing very complicated. I don't need to show you any graphs or any tables. It's just logically absurd that you have a situation where right now nobody can afford a house. I mean, people who haven't already got one. The average cost of a house in the UK now is over £300,000. The average cost of a house in London is £730,000. Well, you've got to be earning a huge salary to be able to afford such a property, and very few people can, and so the only people who are ever going to own a house are people who inherit one, and this really is senseless. I mean, there is no reason why houses should be so expensive. Now, I started to think about all this when I went to I went to Belgium a couple of weeks ago. I went to a town called Liège in the southeast to do a little video showing, sort of trying to show the quality of life there and how things are in Belgium compared with the UK. Because we're being told by Tories all the time about how it's just as bad everywhere else. No matter how bad it is here, it's just as bad everywhere else. When I wanted to show, and I've tried to in a couple of previous videos to show that things are actually quite a bit better in Europe than they are here, and there's a lot more optimism than there is here. But what I found when I was in Belgium was that everything seemed relatively expensive compared with here. I thought prices of goods in the shops, at one point I saw an Easter egg which was €64. I saw women's dresses, summer dresses at sort of €500. Not that I have any idea about the price of a woman's dress, but prices generally, and I ate in a couple of restaurants and I thought the prices were really quite high. I was quite surprised. And the funny thing was that all these restaurants, all these bars were absolutely packed, and the shopping centres were packed. Everywhere was packed. People were spending. I thought this is very odd. It's such a contrast with the UK, where nobody can afford to go down to the pub and have a half a beer. And so when I got back, I thought I'd just do a little bit of research and have a look and see how prices do compare between the UK and Belgium. Now, there's a very good website called Numbeo. And they, for countries all over the world, they take a whole list of categories of products, 53 in total, I think it is. And they take, for example, the cost of a meal for two, the cost of a McDonald's, and the cost of a litre of milk and a litre of wine and a kilo of butter and so on. All these different items they get the prices for, they quote the prices for. And they add into that, they add in cost of electricity and gas, and the cost of renting and buying property, and also they include salaries. So you can get a picture as to what the cost of living is like in any particular country. The way they get these prices, they don't go around with a clipboard. What they do is they ask people to contribute, and so thousands and thousands of people are sending in prices all the time, and they average them all out. So I think it's probably a reasonably reliable source of information. And so I looked through, and sure enough, I found that eating out in restaurants and a lot of food products were more expensive in Belgium. Not a lot more, but they were more expensive. I also noticed that salaries are 14% higher in the UK than they are in Belgium. So I thought to myself, they've got less salary, and prices are all higher, and yet they're all out spending, all having a good time, and everyone looks very happy. What's going on here? So I had a further look, and I looked at the cost of renting. And the cost of renting, and I think in Europe generally people rent more than they do here, but the cost of renting in the UK is between 47 and 67% more expensive than renting in Belgium. If you're buying a property, the cost is between 56 and 66% more than here. So it's a huge difference. On top of that, gas and electricity cost 50% more in the UK than it does in Belgium. And as far as transport is concerned, I took a train from Brussels to Liège. It was 50 miles, and had I done an equivalent journey, say from London to Oxford at the same time, the price in the UK would have been more than double what it cost me. And so when you bear in mind that the biggest item expenditure for almost everybody is their mortgage or their rent, the fact that it is so much more expensive here means that nobody's got any money. People are being so squeezed, and at the same time, we're being squeezed everywhere. You look at, supermarkets are doubling their profits, and so prices of food are not staying high. And you look at, for example, car insurance. Lots of people, stories of car insurance doubling, and all sorts of other where they can, they'll put the prices up. We're paying the highest taxes ever, so we're being squeezed and squeezed and squeezed and squeezed. And so more and more people are just going to find it more and more difficult to manage because of these huge rent and mortgage payments. And given that we've had a really tough time, everybody's had a bad time, but we've had an even tougher time because of Brexit. And so there must be, throughout the country, there must be just thousands and thousands of people who are maxed out on the credit cards, can't borrow any more money. A lot of them have their fingers crossed, thinking that the moment Keir Starmer takes over, everything's going to be absolutely brilliant and fine again, which it most certainly isn't. And I think a lot of these people are just not going to be able to pay the mortgage. They're not going to be able to pay the rent. And I think there's going to be a big squeeze. And I think it's very, very likely that property prices are going to start dropping sometime soon, and that it could well lead to some whole panic and a general collapse in house prices. I just don't see how you can sustain these, what are in effect artificial prices. I mean, there's no reason. It's not simply a supply and demand. We know there are reasons why prices are high. There are all sorts of reasons, like, for example, there's a shortage of housing. There's a reason that prices have been bid up because interest rates were so low and people thought they could afford more expensive houses, and so on, and people have speculated. All sorts of reasons like that. But the basic thing is that the prices are just unreasonable here and quite crazy. And so it's a question of really, why is it? Why is it our prices house prices are so much higher than they are in Europe? And I wanted to tell you a story. I came to London in the 70s, and I was living in Kensington, and I wanted to rent a room for an office, and I rented a room in a big house. It was a house of about 20 rooms, I suppose. It's about 6 floors, a huge detached house. And the owner of the house lived in the basement. It was a woman, and she had a cleaner. She was always shouting out. It turned out it was her sister. And I was probably paying £8 a week or something. It was in those days it was very cheap. And at some point, a sort of con man moved in next door, in the room next to me. He was from Guyana or Ghana or somewhere, I'm not sure which. And he said he was a film producer. And he was all this big talk about he was going to employ these great stars and all the rest of it. And I mean, it was just all talk. And during the time he was there was a constant succession of girls coming in, all hoping to get a part in films which he never made. But on one occasion, he obviously hadn't paid his rent, and there was a row between him and the lady who owned the house. And I remember it very well. It's one of those sort of those events that sort of stuck in my mind for some reason or other. And so they were outside my room. They're shouting, and come the end, the guy said to her, he said, "Oh, for God's sake, woman, stop going on about the rent. I'll buy your house from you. How much do you want for it?" So she said, 55,000, and he said, "I'll give you 50, because he ain't got a penny." And so that was that, and I don't remember what happened after that. Now, this, as it happens, was a very nice house. It's in a road which is actually called Holland Park, which backs onto the Holland Park, and it consists of 40 houses, 20 on each side of the road, but they're big, white, double-fronted, huge houses. And gradually the price of these started ticking up in the 80s and the 90s, and by the turn of the century they were going for somewhere which is sort of 1 and 5 million. And Richard Branson bought one. I think right now the Beckhams live in one of them as well, a few doors down from where I was. Anyway, Branson bought one, and he sold his in 2006 for 17.5 million. Now this is a house exactly the same, really, as the house that this woman was prepared to sell 35 years earlier for 55,000. So it's a fantastic inflation in all that time. That house that Branson owned was sold in 2016, and bear in mind it's really nice. It's got a squash court in the basement. It's got a swimming pool in the basement. Big house. It was sold in 2016 for £55 million. So you say there's, it's 1,000 times what it would have been in the 1970s, and how's that possible? How is it possible that a house can be 1,000 times more expensive, having been done up and so on? But it really makes no sense. And there's stories like that. I don't think quite as extreme as that, but there's stories like that all over London. Anyone who came to London in the 70s can tell stories about how property was so cheap compared with now. Incidentally, the council tax, they're band H, that house, a £55 million house, they pay £3,017 a year. So I don't know how they managed to find that. But anyway, so you say, well, how is this possible? And we all know how it's possible. It's that sometime during the between the sort of late 70s and the turn of the century, the whole world discovered that if you want to put your money somewhere safe, in a country with a sound and sensible government, a law-abiding country where nobody's going to ask any questions, nobody's going to ask where your money came from, buy a property in London. And so from all over the world, both legitimate and illegitimate buyers came buying houses in the names of companies that were based in tax havens, which were owned by other companies that were owned in other tax havens, so you could never trace where they came from. All this money poured in, and the government said, oh, this is wonderful, all this inward investment, look at all these people got confidence in us, and they're all coming in investing in the UK, and some people came and set up business, some people bought houses and never came here. And you've had over this period billions and billions and billions come into London to buy property. Very often property that's left empty, very often property, there are areas where there are all these rich properties where you never see a light on. And I mean, it got so absurd. One time I was in Hong Kong, I think about 15 years ago, and I went into a shopping centre, and there was a big display. Some estate agents there were selling property, and there was this great big model, and I thought, oh, it's fantastic, have a look at this. And this was the time when they were all investing in China in property, and it was all going crazy there. And I looked at this model, and it was somewhere in South London. I think it was Battersea or Vauxhall or somewhere. And they were selling to Chinese people who would never come there. There was a story only a short while ago I heard about somebody who'd bought a property and sold it 3 years later and had never seen it, never visited it. And so much property in central London is just investment money boxes being bought for an investment to put money safe, as opposed to accommodation. And so all that accommodation is not available. And not only that, people like, for example, the lady where I had my office. I mean, she would have sold that house maybe a year later for 100,000. She'd suddenly have got 100,000, a huge amount of money, and she'd have gone out to the suburbs somewhere and probably bid up against other people who are moving out and started bidding up the price of the properties on the outskirts of London. And then it would have gradually fanned out, so that like the thing about the big boat in the harbour when the tide comes in, it's not just the big boat that lifts, it's all the small boats as well. Gradually these ripples of increasing prices would have gone throughout the whole property market, and so you ended up with this huge, completely unjustified, well, not unjustified, but unsustainable high prices throughout, and it just really feels like a bubble. You just think, how can it last? How can it be sustained? And I think there's another thing, and this is the second reason why I think it's going to be a crash, and it's this, that whereas I said before, people invested in London, bought property in London because they knew we had a sensible government. We were stable and we were, reliable and law-abiding and all the rest of it. And people from around the world, they can see now we've got a crazy government. They look at the last 3 prime ministers and they think this country's gone mad. Is it really a stable government? What else is going to happen next? They look at hear reports of the health service, hear reports of the water and the sewage and all the rest of it, and they think that it's kind of not really quite such an attractive place to invest. And there are other places. I mean, Dubai is happy to welcome any money from wherever it's come from, and places like New York and Miami, and there are all sorts of places. And I have a feeling, because, for example, the stock exchange is not doing very well, the city's not doing very well, and things are gradually leaching away, and it won't take very much for a few rich people to start moving out of London and start saying, I don't want to be in London anymore, I'd rather move my money somewhere else, and that could very easily lead to a collapse. And if central London prices start collapsing, that will spread throughout the whole country. And as I say, it's the whole thing is so artificial, and it's such a drag on the economy that so much money is being sucked out into property for no good reason, and at the expense of all of us, because we just how can you possibly start to recover your economy if nobody can afford to go out, nobody can afford to buy anything, nobody can afford to go to restaurants and bars and stuff, because all the money's being sucked up by the mortgage or the rent. But anyway, as I say, I'm not a property expert, and I'm sure plenty of people will be able to tell me that I don't know what I'm talking about, but that's what I think about it. And so if you've watched this far, thank you very much indeed. And if you haven't already subscribed, I really would appreciate it. Or if you know anybody you think might be interested, I'd be very grateful. And until next time, thanks for watching, and bye for now.